All right, please don't go anywhere. We've got an amazing panel coming up, our last panel of the day. I'm going to start introducing our amazing panelists as they come up here. Adrienne Adams is the Speaker of the New York City Council. It's okay, Speaker, take your time. Yes. It's such a pleasure to have you here, Speaker Adams.
Thank you.
But please, all of you come up. Please, I'm going to introduce you while you're coming up. But Speaker Adams represents several neighborhoods in southeastern Queens. Among her many, many impressive accomplishments, she has secured record-level investments in schools, parks, and libraries. She launched the innovative CUNY Reconnect initiative, which we're very, very happy about. And she's championed funding for higher ed, cultural institutions, healthcare, and so much more. Thank you for being here. All right, Borough President Mark Levine, thank you for being here. In addition to, or prior to being Borough President of this great borough of Manhattan, he also served 2 terms in the City Council, where he was, honestly, a real difference maker on issues related to public health, parks, affordable housing, and many other things. I have to say, I first met you, I think about 20 years ago when you were running One Economy. I don't even know if you remember that. But a nonprofit organization that provided technology to residents of affordable housing. So it's great to see you again and great to have you here today.
We were once young, Jonathan.
Last but certainly not least, Sheena Wright. It's so great to see you, Sheena. Sheena is New York City's Deputy Mayor for Strategic Initiatives, where among many other things, she has spearheaded vital new efforts to bolster the city's human services nonprofit organizations and expanded the Summer Youth Employment Program. Prior to her appointment, she served 9 years as President and CEO of United Way of New York City. So it's so great to have all of you here. Thank you for being here. So we're at an event here today that's about specific ideas for creating a more equitable city. And I know, and props to all of you, because you've had a role, each of you, in really making a difference in creating ideas that take our city toward a more equitable place. You've helped put in place those kind of ideas, but clearly there's a lot more to do. And I guess I want to ask you first, before we talk about what's already been done, among those things that you see that aren't yet happening, but that you think should be priorities, that you'd like to see, that you think could make a difference for creating a more equitable New York City. I'd love to see if there are any things that you all are thinking about, looking at with your staffs right now, that you'd like to see the city prioritize in the months or years ahead. Let me start with you, Speaker Adams.
Sure. Good morning, Jonathan. It's great to see you, and it is such an honor to be on a panel with my friends. So we actually know each other, and we're all friends up here. And good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Well, the council is actually advancing legislation. And it's actually my bill, I'm proud to say. We're taking a look at civil service careers. Imagine that. The city is very short right now when it comes to filling and placing certain jobs within the city. So we're actually advancing in the council right now my bill, and that is going to require the Department of Citywide Administrative Services to actually put in place those mechanisms to prepare homeless individuals, individuals that are exiting from the justice system, youth who are aging out of foster care. We want to take a look at how to best target those who've been underserved traditionally. I come out of a civil servant and union household, and I know firsthand of what this means as far as economic stability in our city. Right now, we need it more than ever before, so we need to take a look at civil service opportunities. They're there. You don't have to look any further than the city of New York, right there in our own backyard, front yard, and around space. So let's go ahead and prepare those that are ready, willing, and able to work. People want to work. They don't want a handout. People really do want to work and do their part for society and be an integral part of what makes this society work. So we want to do our part in the council to go ahead and get legislation and advance that to making that happen.
That's fantastic. We actually heard in previous discussions today how important city government jobs can be just for, access to good paying careers, and that there are some hurdles in place for a lot of folks to get those careers. In fact, one of our previous speakers talked about how the state of Maryland, Governor Hogan recently kind of took a step to eliminate the degree requirements for a few hundred specific titles. So anyway, great to hear about the initiative you have going on. Deputy Mayor Wright, let me go to you next, and just to see what is not happening right now that you'd like to see as a priority.
Well, yeah, and I'm also happy to be here with friends and feel like family, which is great. And just to pick up on the theme of Speaker Adams, and we're really looking forward to that partnership. As was said earlier, Jonathan, the city is the biggest employer. I mean, you can take the next 5 private employers, it's 300,000 people. And so that is a very powerful engine to really advance opportunity in New York City. So really breaking down some of those barriers that are really important. One of the, and connected to that is community hiring. That's also something that I heard in some of the earlier panels and themes. Right now, the city of New York does not have the ability to require any company that it procures with, a big project, to hire people locally. And if we could do that, that would really, because the economy is going to rebound. We know things happen in cycles. The challenge and the question is it going to be inclusive? Right before COVID-19 in the South Bronx, we had the highest investment, economic development activity, the highest unemployment. And so how do we hardwire those opportunities to the people that actually live in community is a critical tool to making sure that we have inclusive economy. So there is community hiring legislation that had been advanced at the state level over the past 2 sessions, and we need to get it passed this year. It has union support, it has advocates, nonprofits.
How does that work, Deputy Mayor? I'm sorry to interrupt, but just is that for community hiring for development projects that go through? Is it for local employers? Could you just elaborate a little bit?
So the legislation enables the city and our procurement authority, and that was also something that was talked about earlier today, to say you've got to hire X percentage of people, or you have to use best efforts to hire people from certain zip codes and neighborhoods and communities. And to really enforce that, and to also make sure with a focus, because we just have to be so precise in ensuring that we're investing to really disrupt the disparities and the inequities that we have. And so really providing some resource to build out an infrastructure to make sure that those connections are made, to make sure that those communities have the career pathing, have the apprenticeship models, have the development opportunities to access those opportunities. But it's really creating all of the conditions to enable economic mobility.
Got it. Well, I'm just going to take the moment, since you mentioned all this, to throw in my 2 cents on something, because only because last year we did a report that somewhat connects to that, and it was looking at kind of making the opportunity of our rezonings in New York City. Oftentimes when we do rezonings, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of, we're going to put some parks or libraries in to make sure that those rezonings have community approval, but we've rarely seen workforce training as kind of part of a deal or kind of one of the early steps. And it's something that we think kind of might help ensure that as things go forward, that community residents are able to get some of the jobs and benefits of those changes that happen in certain neighborhoods. But anyway, just my own 2 cents. Borough President, what about you?
Well, first, Jonathan, I just want to thank you and the Center for the Urban Future for what you've done for the city over now decades. Just such an engine for good ideas, and you're proving it here today with this report, which my staff has been poring over. There's tons of great ideas. I am very happy to be part of this conversation with 2 extraordinary leaders and, yes, friends. Really feel fortunate to be here. I will say that the last 2.5 years have been a major blow to equity for New York City. The pandemic, which of course brutally, disproportionately hit communities of color in New York City, but also the economic crisis, a time when literally millions lost their livelihood, while a very small number actually saw their stock portfolio increase. That actually happened over the past 2.5 years. Major setback for equity. So we have so much work to do. Your report is very well timed for that reason. One area where I remain extremely concerned is the plight of tenants and the rising number of evictions in New York City as we're coming out of the pandemic. And when I was in the council, I was pleased that we were able to pass a landmark law creating right to counsel for tenants in housing court, making New York City the first place in America to do that. And going into the pandemic, it was yielding incredible results with a big drop in evictions and data showing that for the tenants that had attorneys, 86% of the time they remained in their homes. Fast forward to today, and we have a real problem in housing court, a real problem with living up to that promise of right to counsel, because the number of eviction cases has now exceeded the system's capacity to provide lawyers. And it's partly because we're working through a backlog of something like 75,000 cases that were not moving during the pandemic for obvious reasons, but it's also because there's a shortage of attorneys, because there's a shortage in almost every sector right now. We're seeing thousands of tenants hit with evictions, go into court without an attorney to represent them. And this really does have devastating consequences for attorneys. We have called on the state's Office of Court Administration to slow the calendaring of cases. We don't want any case moving forward if the tenant does not have an attorney. That's our standard. Judges have that power, by the way, but the courts have refused to implement that as a policy. So meanwhile, you look at the graph, every month more people are being evicted. That is, by the way, the #1 cause of homelessness for families in New York City. There's misconceptions about that. The #1 reason why families land in shelters is because they were evicted. So if you can spend a couple $1,000s on an attorney up front, keep the family in the home, you're saving tens and tens of thousands for the city in a homeless shelter, and most importantly, you're avoiding all the human suffering that happens when a family loses their home. So this is one idea that I'm very focused on now.
Love it. First of all, I really like all of those ideas, and I imagine you have more than one. And so even though I have other questions, I'd like to just kind of repeat that first one and just see if each of you would like to share one other thing that you'd like to see, or things that you're thinking about or that your staffs are thinking about that you want to mention.
Oh, yes. I will mention again what I mentioned previously, and that is civil service careers and the pathway to economic stability. I have also championed an initiative that is called CUNY Reconnect, and it is as a result of research by Center for an Urban Future, and I thank you for your research with that. We are now implementing, and I'm really proud of this, this is the Speaker's Initiative for the first time, $4.4 million. Invested in an initiative to bring back those who have credits, earned credits, but do not yet have a degree. How fantastic is that? So we are taking a look at honing in on primarily Black and Latina women, who are the highest percentage of those who don't have a degree but have some level of credits to actually attain a degree but had to leave the system. CUNY in particular, because of, it could be anything from financial need or child care need, taking care of a parent, or anything that might have led them to leave the CUNY system. We want them to come back because we want them to have that higher education degree. We know that statistically, higher education degree brings more economic stability into our society as well. So we've got a lot of ideas around it. We are piloting right now. I don't know if Kenneth Adams is still somewhere around LaGuardia Community College. We are piloting that, but we want to scale it up also. After the pilot, we would love to see this implemented in all CUNYs across the city. So remember CUNY Reconnect, and bringing those students back who have yet to earn their degree but have earned some college credits and are just almost there to getting that degree.
Well, kudos to you. Actually, can we get a hand for that idea? I mean, I think there's, I love it because that's not just an idea, it's something that you made happen this year. And also congrats to the administration for coming together around the budget. And I know more than $4 million was dedicated to this new idea. So obviously that's having real tangible result because we know how important a higher ed degree is to accessing good jobs. So fantastic to hear that. Deputy Mayor Wright.
Sure, I feel like, we're like the Supremes or something, because I'm going to follow up on that. And, when I was looking at the report, which is really remarkable, these great ideas, I was so invigorated and excited about so many of them. And I went back and looked at what we've been doing in these past 9 months. We've made about 300, literally, commitments across a variety of ways, and there's a lot of kind of intersection in what's in the report. And I guess, so there's I could say 299 more things. But, I think two things, and following up what the speaker talked about, is really this focus in terms of our whole educational system, right? Pre-K, all the way through 16, of really making sure that we understand that we're building pathways for young people to, be a part of an inclusive economy, to have all of the preparation that they need to be self-sufficient and civically engaged and all of those things. So from the Chancellor to the Chancellor, Chancellor Banks for the DOE, and Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez, that are their North Stars, pathways to inclusive economy. It's about career readiness. It's about apprenticeships. It's about, we had the largest summer youth employment program, which is really like the springboard for that. And it's really about directly connecting our educational institution, this was also talked about in the previous panel, with industry, with the business community, with the academic institutions. Our workforce and career talent tech ecosystem is completely fractured. It exists across 21 different agencies in the city. The state has its thing, the federal government, industries over here, and this attempt to really bring it all together in a really collaborative, aligned, and intentional way is a body of work that this administration is doing that I think will be absolutely groundbreaking. And it's happening across different leaders in partnership with efforts from the council and other elected officials as well. So really getting that right, making sure, because we do things in silos, that we're breaking down those barriers, we're connecting the dots, and making sure that we have mutually reinforcing sets of interventions and supports, because that's going to get us furthest faster. And that includes things like having access to childcare when you're in school, having all of those other opportunities. But really setting that as our North Star, particularly as our young people, that we're creating just a ramp for them to run and reach their full potential.
Fantastic. Congrats on all that work. I know that you've, or the administration has started the, I think the Future of Workforce Task Force.
Kicks off tomorrow.
Which kicks off, that's right. So congrats on that. Borough President, I mean, the floor is open for any idea, but I'm curious, like, you've been such a leader on public health, and we know that there are so many disparities that really kind of came up during COVID, or at least were magnified during the past couple of years around public health. Are there things there that you think that we as a city ought to do to help close disparities that have been around for too long?
There's so much, and some of it was in your report. You mentioned indoor air. We have completely neglected the question of whether the air we're breathing in buildings has been filtered adequately, what the airflow is. We were left to scramble when COVID hit to reverse engineer systems in our school buildings. But this has a tremendous equity impact because people who are in modern high-end housing with centralized air probably have decent ventilation systems, and people who are in substandard housing or substandard work environments don't. And we would be dangerously naive to think that we're not going to face another serious respiratory disease. It could be another round of COVID with the new variant. It could be a pathogen that we don't even know yet. The time is now to start investing in that. We really, in my opinion, need to have standards comparable to what we have in the fire code, which defines standards for every indoor setting, whether it's a home, a public building, an office space, standards on airflow and filtration. After other bouts with serious respiratory illnesses, famously the 1918 flu pandemic, or after bad epidemics of TB in New York City, we changed our buildings. And part of the reason that buildings of that era have large windows which open is because people were thinking about air quality. But then in the 80s and the 90s, we started to create hermetically sealed office buildings where ventilation was not even a consideration. So we're working on actually legislation, which some of your colleagues in the council are active on, which may be making an appearance soon. And I think this is going to be a really important fight for health equity, for public health, and for being prepared for the next pandemic.
Fantastic. I'm curious because just a couple weeks ago, the state comptroller put out a somewhat scary analysis showing that the cities can be facing as much as a $10 billion budget deficit in the coming years, I think 2026. And so obviously as we think about bold ideas, bold actions that city government can take that are really needed to create a more equitable city, because we know investment, resources are going to be so important, but obviously the city is dealing with these issues right now, or at least soon might be, around budgetary constraints. Are there things that you all think could happen outside of city government, or that city government could do that don't require a ton of resources? For instance, in earlier panels today, we heard a lot about the role of employers and how important employers are to, and the culture changes that they're going to need to make to expand access to good jobs, to help close the racial wealth gaps we have in the city. Are there things city government can be doing or is doing to work with employers and make sure more of them make those culture changes? We also heard Darren Walker talk a little bit about the role of philanthropy. And here in New York, we've got amazing philanthropic foundations here, but a lot of them are funding nonprofits that are doing really innovative work, but at a small scale, and maybe there's opportunities for government/philanthropy partnerships. Anyway, that's a long question, I apologize, but are there things that government can do that either don't cost a ton of money that will have a big impact, or ways you can work with these other non-governmental partners like employers or philanthropy?
Well, I have to congratulate the deputy mayor. The expansion of SYEP was amazing this year. If we can take a look at something on a grander scale, to continue the notion of SYEP, to bring that philanthropic spirit into the opportunities that we have for youth, not just for the summer, but year-round. If our employers would continue that kind of thing, and I would even encourage employers to just create their own. Their own internal incubators or resources internally in these companies, in these organizations, to help our youth flourish, to continue the employment opportunity. But the learning is so critical in these organizations, in these companies, for majors that our college students may have that can actually enhance their careers going forward. I'm going to also pivot back to the civil service career pipeline itself. We're actually taking a look at, in the council, not just helping DCAS to work towards those civil service opportunities, but to create an ambassadorship program, if you will, to go out into the colleges, to actually teach our college students about the opportunities that the city has to offer. Let's go out there and let's try to recruit them in. So many great opportunities are available for the city. As the deputy mayor said, the city is the largest employer. Fantastic opportunities to work with the city. Also, something that I've taken a look at in another initiative, trauma resource centers. It's another initiative that I put in $2.4 million. New York State will have its first trauma resource centers. All too often we don't talk about the victims, the folks that are actually victimized when it comes to horrific crimes and trauma. We don't look at those types of cycles that keep individuals in the cycle of victimization. Well, trauma resource centers are going to be that vehicle to help those individuals to break those cycles of violence that sometimes keep folks swirling around in that same behavior. So we've taken a model from California and other places across the country, and we want to go ahead and put forth those resources in trauma resource centers. The thought is to bring the first two to Brooklyn and the Bronx, the two highest boroughs when it comes to crime, and bring those resource centers in to give individuals an opportunity to actually heal. Again, we don't talk about the victims. We talk about other things, and we talk about the punitive system and how to punish folks, but we really don't talk about the victims. What is the trauma that goes on with the victims? How are they perpetrating? How are they living their lives? How are they dealing with relationships going forward? And how is the trauma that they have suffered because of instances of violence? How is that continuing to be perpetrated? So we want to try some different things. So I think along the line of philanthropy, let's get our college students more engaged and others more engaged in forward-thinking opportunities. Let's talk about TRCs or trauma resource centers also, so that we take another look at public safety. There's another side of it, and I think healing is the other side of that.
That's great, and congrats for taking an idea from another state. We don't always do that in New York, but that's a great step. Other thoughts?
Sure. This administration is, it's a central theme that we've got to work together, and we've got to connect across sector and really work together and leverage each other's best thinking in order to get done what we need to get done for the city of New York. So when it comes to philanthropy, when it comes to the corporate sector, early in the administration, I think we were 3 months in, Darren Walker and Rich Bury co-hosted every major philanthropic organization in the city of New York. And we talked about what are the priorities, what do we need to do together, how do we leverage your capital for innovation, how do you all come together in a more coordinated, aligned way in an investment strategy. We've been constantly engaged with the corporate sector, and a couple of outputs from that. One of the big initiatives that we launched, and I'm so proud and excited about because I've heard so much of it talked about today, is a real effort on increasing early childhood education and childcare in the city of New York, and there's a huge blueprint that we put out, and it looks at accessibility, affordability, quality. It's a dual generation strategy. It's focused on children as well as the adults and the families and the caregivers, and we worked with Robin Hood, and they catalyzed a $50 million innovation fund that will do the things that government dollars can't easily do, that helps us look forward, innovate, leverage what's happening in other communities around the world, and that's a model, and that's what we want to continue to do as we move forward. And the corporate sector, again, to pick up on what the speaker mentioned, we had about 175,000 applications for SYAP. We had 110,000 slots. The business community can more than pick those up. So how do we scale, right? We created a model, and we're now, with Deputy Mayor Torres Springer, with Abby Jo Siegel and others, DYCD, working with employers to create, we've got a template. Here, you can do this. And then the last thing I'll say is I think that there's an opportunity to be more innovative when we talk about access to capital markets. We know what our commercial real estate is. We heard that a little bit earlier. That's a big part of our revenue, tax receipts, all of those challenges. When I started my career in the nonprofit public sector space, the low-income housing tax credit was a fairly new, fangled thing, right? That catalyzed investment in affordable housing. That was a long time ago. There are opportunities to innovate, and how do we access capital markets to do some of the things beyond city tax levy, beyond those kinds of resources, and the business sector, academics, and others really can help innovate and think differently, because there is a lot of capital out here to get things done that's not always about city tax levy or receipts from commercial taxes. That will be a challenge, and it is going to be a challenge over the next few years. So we have to think differently and innovate, and we can only do that in partnership. Let
me follow up really quickly. Is this on? Well, I'm going to talk loud. I just want to follow up quickly about, because obviously this administration, it does seem like you have taken some really important steps around partnering with employers on the apprenticeship announcement from a couple weeks ago, around SYEP, as you mentioned. But in the earlier panel, we heard Winston Fisher, for instance, talk about how, hey, he's a big company, but he's not a big company in the sense of JP Morgan Chase or Bloomberg. And it's not always so easy, even for companies of his size, to try to like partner with CUNY or figure out how to develop internship programs or take the steps that they want to do to, help expand access to those jobs. And that seems like an important thing. And he and others have mentioned today just how can government play kind of a convening role or do things to simplify it for businesses who are interested in helping to expand access within their companies, but don't really know what to do.
And we took a really big step around that this summer in partnership with Jobs First. We actually convened small and medium-sized businesses to really say, okay, how can this work for you? What are some of the things that you need? What are the capacities that you need to develop? And I like Winston's example. He said, I think they take about 4 students every few months. Which, if you do that at scale across and small businesses and medium-sized businesses are the bulk of businesses, you can really have a lot of impact. So we are absolutely focused on that and doing that in partnership. So it's the co-creation and co-development. So we've created a table, which you talked a little bit about, where we're bringing people in because it's got to be this user-centered design. It's got to work for the young person, but it also has to work for the employer. And so bringing all of those pieces together to design, iterate, and try. So we did something this summer just to kind of kick it off with a network of small and medium-sized businesses. We have a report that's about to come out, and we want to scale that as we move forward so that we can continue to grow and iterate and develop to meet those needs.
Wonderful. Borough President, just the same question about dealing with the kind of budgetary restraints in the future that may be out there. Are there things with regard to things that you could do that don't require a ton of money, or partnerships with employers or philanthropy or anyone else?
Well, you're right. The outlook fiscally for the city and state is cloudy for the coming years, and that is bad news for equity, because when government has to start cutting budgets, the people most impacted are the most vulnerable, who depend on city services or state services. So it is imperative that we find a way to grow the economy of New York City and do it in a way that doesn't repeat the patterns of inequality of the past. One way you see both the possibility and the challenges of that work is in technology, where New York City's tech sector, now it's the second largest in the country. We've passed Boston. We're second to Silicon Valley. All the big 5 tech firms are expanding here: Meta, Facebook, Google, et cetera. And there's a whole world of small and mid-sized tech firms which are expanding here and hiring here. And they're good-paying jobs. These are jobs where a couple years out of school you can make $100,000. But who are they hiring? They are recruiting thousands of people from outside of New York City to take those jobs. And the truth is that there is not a lack of talent in New York City at all. There's just a lack of opportunity to get the right training to be ready to step into one of those jobs. And here there has been some good public-private partnership to try and change that. Under the de Blasio administration, they started Computer Science for All. It was a public-private partnership. It definitely has helped. There's more computer science training happening in the schools than there was, but I think it also shows the limit of philanthropy. And you talked about philanthropy being good for demonstrating what's possible. I think you could probably say that initiative did it, but it's a big system with almost 1 million kids. And today, most schools in New York City do not have a certified computer science teacher. The people doing this work are people from other disciplines, math or social studies, who have an interest, a side interest, and they're doing the best they can, but they are not people who have professional experience with coding, and it's limiting just how robust the curriculum can be. So I think we have to do much more to offer graduates a track where they're learning Python and C++ and whatever the languages are that are in demand right now for people coming out of school. There will be jobs. There are jobs ready for them, but we need to go much bigger in preparing them with those skills so that we stop recruiting people from outside for this growing sector.
Yeah, that's important. And I guess I'd just like to add, we did just do a report partnering with Tech NYC very recently, just a couple months ago, about the tech sector. And just throwing out one quick stat, we found that over the last 11 years in New York City, the tech sector added 114,000 new jobs in New York City. And by way of comparison, hospitals during that time added 4,000. And I mention hospitals only because we know how important hospitals are for good, accessible jobs. But just the scale of tech is creating so many good jobs in New York, and we know that they're not as diverse as really they need to be. We've been writing a little bit about how to go beyond computer science for all. One of the things that we've kind of hit on is that a lot of the teachers in New York City, wonderful teachers, but many of them don't have the skills or the experience. I couldn't teach computing if I was to get into a classroom right now. But these days, computational thinking, just being able to teach basic computing skills in everything that's taught in schools is so important. And a lot of these teachers come into their classrooms basically being trained at CUNY. And so there's an opportunity for CUNY, as they're training our teachers, to kind of learn some of these computational skills to be able to apply in the classroom. So it's just one thing that a lot of folks, I think, are looking at, not just us, but there's an idea right there. But I also want to talk about this idea that I mentioned that Darren also spoke about, and that you alluded to, Borough President, around a lot of times philanthropy is doing really good at funding important nonprofit initiatives. We've got lots of nonprofits in the room today. We know how important nonprofits are to closing gaps and helping New Yorkers lift out of poverty, or just being the safety net of last resort in New York. But those programs stay very small. And one thing I thought of is that, and I'm sorry for the long rambling here, but you talk about the tech sector. We know Perscolas, Pursuit, the Knowledge House, there's so many great nonprofits that really are training people, and that is leading directly to a job in high-paying tech careers, but those organizations are serving a few dozen or a few hundred people. And I think that, I've talked to a lot of nonprofits over the years, and I think one of the things that they always hit up against is, how do they scale up? And so I'm just curious to put to all of you, any thoughts about how government could help nonprofits, the ones that we know are working, how to help them scale up more? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I have a passion about this. And it's a great point. We are creating a mayor's office of nonprofits. It'll be the first one that the city of New York has ever had. And nonprofits, I would say, not only just fill in the gaps, they're critical, essential partners of government. Government doesn't work without nonprofits in the city of New York, right? The delivery system of services and supports, and certainly all of the work that they do kind of to innovate. And historically, we've treated them not so well, right? They're vendors. And the city has obviously done a terrible job of paying them. They could work for a year or more and not get paid. And not honoring what the true overhead costs are, all those things. So one of the biggest things that the city can do is treat nonprofits with respect, pay them for their services, right? Yes. And make it not so difficult to do business with government. I mean, we looked across 10 different agencies, and nonprofits procurement is about 40% of all procurement in the city of New York, and we're partnering with the council to make it easier as well for discretionary contracts. But I mean, we looked at 10 different agencies, and if you're a nonprofit, you can have a contract with one agency, another, and you have 17 different experiences. It shouldn't be that way. So years ago, we created the Office of Small Business Services because it was difficult for small businesses to do business with the city. So this is a similar thing. And we want to invest in capacity building and technical assistance so that those institutions can scale. Because I think sometimes we think, oh, those are great ideas, those are great outcomes, but we don't appreciate that you need a business, you need an institution that's healthy and strong to be able to do that at scale. And so that's one of the things that not only we need to recognize as government, but philanthropy does as well, because they've not always invested in the necessary overhead and resources that nonprofits need to be healthy institutions.
Excellent. Love that. And congrats on the amazing work around human services nonprofits. I thank both of you because I think there's some real dollars in the city to help to pay workers better and to clear some of the backlogs. So congratulations on that. Any other thoughts? I mean, just let me kind of go out more broadly again. We talked in different perspectives earlier today with some of the idea pitches we had with the panel before. There are inequalities in so many aspects of city life that really we've seen in this pandemic have been exacerbated. Borough President, you mentioned housing, just one kind of slice of housing, but also there's access to open space, transit, public health, so many things, small businesses. Any other thoughts or ideas, things that either you're working on or that you'd love to see the city do more of that might help close some of these gaps?
Oh my gosh, I don't know where to begin. No, I do know where to begin, actually. The council has prioritized pay parity. I'm sure that everyone in this room knows that this is the first ever majority female city council in the history of New York City. So obviously, we are prioritizing pay parity. In the city of New York. We've just put out a report a couple of weeks ago having to do with pay parity, pay equity. Every year it seems, every year we have a rally on the steps of City Hall speaking about the lack of pay equity and pay parity for women, for Black women, for Latina women, for white women, for Asian women across this city. And it is still such an embarrassment to the city. When we take a look at, and this is a pet peeve of mine, and I'm going to speak very, very honestly about this. Allison Russo was murdered. She was a lieutenant, paramedic, came out of the ranks of EMT for the city of New York, brutally murdered. Allison Russo was murdered with a lack of pay parity from the city of New York. And I say this because this is a personal issue for me. My own daughter just graduated out of the ranks of FDNY paramedics 2 weeks ago. Part of that reason was because she had been an EMT for 5 years, single mother, but was not making enough money to feed her 4 children. So her dad and me have been subsidizing our grandchildren's meals, their uniforms for school. I can tell you all this. Their uniforms for school, because our daughter has not made enough money to support her family. That is an abomination for the city of New York. And for me, I take it personally. I'm going to continue to fight. As the first African American speaker of the New York City Council, I'm going to continue to fight for pay parity, not just for my daughter, but for Allison Russo, for her family. She was a mother also. And for all of the accolades that we can throw out now, that the city can throw out now, that FDNY can throw out now, Allison Russo was murdered and never had pay parity from the FDNY or the city of New York. I'm going to continue to fight, and the women of the New York City Council will continue to fight for pay parity for as long as it takes to get it.
And if I can jump in there, and also kind of our historic number of women deputy mayors in the city of New York. I think, walking into this administration and seeing the disparity, it is an abomination. It is completely unacceptable. We have created a Mayor's Office of Equity, again, the first of its kind here in New York City. I think it was talked about on another panel about having a Chief Equity Officer, and we have a commissioner there. And looking at that report and really creating a roadmap to solve for that is a key priority of this administration as well. And we look forward to doing that in partnership with our electeds across the board, because it is absolutely unacceptable. And the Mayor's Office of Equity is looking at, there are disparities within the disparities, right? So one of the things that the council did, which was very powerful, was around Black maternal health. I mean, there's some things that are just like off the charts. And when we look at, disparities within the disparities, we know, maternal health is a challenge, but the rate that Black women and Black infants were dying, which just didn't make any sense. When we think about small businesses, they're, less than 3.5% of businesses in the city of New York are Black owned. It's just, it's like an outsized disparity. We know when we talk about other, different communities, we have to just be very intentional and focused and precise. And the Mayor's Office of Equity, led by Commissioner Sherman, who is amazing, is really going to be focused on these issues to make sure that no one is left behind, that we don't gloss over and we say, oh, our MWBE numbers, but then we're, or our health equity numbers, but we're, kind of outsized there. Or even when we have more employment, that we don't have these big glaring numbers around unemployment with particular groups or pay parity issues with women versus men.
I love it. Both of those ideas seem absolutely clearly well positioned to make inroads around equity. Let me ask you one last question, and that's just, we haven't talked too much around entrepreneurship and small business. This definitely is a path to wealth creation in communities across our city. We've seen research, our research has shown that we've got some amazing entrepreneurs of color all across the city, but that they don't get to the same scale. And many of them have been financially vulnerable, even before the pandemic started. All of you have talked and done things in support of small businesses throughout your careers and in your current positions. I'm curious, any last thoughts about what you're doing or what you'd like to see around helping more minority and immigrant businesses in this city?
Well, I'll just start by saying the council is very intentional when it comes to equity and the issues of equity for everyone. Institutional racism is real. Like you said, Jonathan, it's very, very real. Some things were just not highlighted until this pandemic. And we started seeing things highlighted and spotlighted, and some things that some of us knew, but others didn't know, and some things that some of us knew, but didn't really realize the scale of the inequity, across the city and really across the country. So it is incumbent upon the council to do our jobs legislatively through policy to try to right those wrongs and to try to make inequity a thing of the past. We definitely can't accomplish it overnight, but we have come out very, very forcefully, very intentionally, as the deputy mayor said, in working to really, really crack this horrible repetition and institutionalized racism that we have across this country. We've got to focus on it now that we all know it's here. We can talk about it. It's out in the open. We don't have to be shy about the conversation. We need to be having those conversations. We need to protect our entrepreneurs. We realize that there are blatant disparities when it comes to the treatment of entrepreneurs of color, minority entrepreneurs, MWBEs. There is definitely inequity when it comes to MWBEs and the treatment of MWBEs. So we've got to be intentional about it, and we can't be afraid to have those conversations about it. The City Council is absolutely dedicated to doing our part when it comes to legislation and policy around it.
All right.
It was very difficult to run a business in New York before the pandemic, and the last 2.5 years have just been an existential threat. We've lost thousands, probably tens of thousands of small businesses, disproportionately businesses owned by New Yorkers of color and by immigrant New Yorkers. We're starting to come out of the worst of the economic challenges, but businesses are still vulnerable, and we're losing more every day. To grow, your question was about growth. You have to have access to capital, and the traditional banking system is not there for minority entrepreneurs and immigrant entrepreneurs. It is too hard to get capital to buy new equipment, to open a second location, to fund growth in any way. Now, there are a network of wonderful community development financial institutions, including a wonderful community credit union uptown, which I founded many years ago, Neighborhood Trust, that are making the kinds of small loans to emerging entrepreneurs that the banks aren't even considering. And these are real engines for opportunity. But getting back to your early point, Jonathan, about what nonprofits can do when we need huge scale, we've got to go bigger. And there's a really bold, exciting idea out there to do that, which is for New York City to create the first municipally owned bank, a publicly owned bank here, which would take some of our billions in city assets and put it into an institution that was mission-driven. And they could do everything from support affordable housing to fund green energy technologies, to fund worker cooperatives, and of course, they could help to expand access to capital for women and minority entrepreneurs, possibly through the existing community development financial institution network. So this is an incredibly exciting, a bold policy, an ambitious one, but ultimately it would help us get to scale in solving the problem of access to capital for the people who traditional banking is leaving behind today.
And just quickly, stabilization is critically important, and Commissioner Kim is certainly very focused on that, the Commissioner of Small Business Services. And, you know, I would, you know, kind of second all the emotion on all of these efforts, but it's absolutely, small businesses are our biggest employers, period. And making sure that we're investing in access to capital, opportunity, equity, and our small businesses is really important. We are going to be extremely focused and are extremely focused on MWBE procurement for the city of New York. We've got a $101 billion budget. The city can make a huge difference in advancing equity and opportunity for Black and brown entrepreneurs in particular. I love there are a lot of great ideas, and 150 ideas. There's one from Joe Scantlebury on entrepreneurialism here, from Living Cities and others. There's a lot we can do with NYCHA. And then the last thing I'll say is we have a whole new industry, cannabis. And this administration with Deputy Mayor Torres Springer, we are absolutely focused on making sure that has equitable opportunity, and for certainly communities that have been most impacted by really unfair prosecution for marijuana.
Absolutely. I've talked to the Commissioner Kim about some of those endeavors, and it sounds fantastic. I'd also mention an idea that Linda Gibbs had in our report around not just city contracting with MWBE, but really looking at our anchor institutions, some of the private employers, universities, hospitals, which spend so much, but not always with communities and with local entrepreneurs. So there's an opportunity there that could be tapped, and government might be helpful in pulling them together. But unfortunately, we've got to end there. I can't thank you all enough. That was fabulous. And can we get a hand for our amazing group of panelists?